former president of the United States, Donald Trump, refused to answer questions today amidst an ongoing controversy as it relates to his home, Mar-a-Lago, in the state of Florida. Joining me now to discuss what is happening with the former president right now is Richard Painter, who is the former White House chief ethics lawyer in the administration of President George W. Bush. Thanks so much for making the time. Let's just start out with that piece that I mentioned. What ultimately is at stake for the former president right now, and how influential could some of the most recent events as it relates to the FBI and his home in Mar-a-Lago be in terms of his political future?
Well, thank you very much for having me on your show. I want to separate out the different particular charges and criminal investigations that involve former President Donald Trump, because unfortunately, Donald Trump has a lot of them. One is in New York, and that is an investigation of the financial dealings of the Trump organization. In particular, the question of whether they said one thing to the government about the value of their properties to pay less taxes, and then turn around and told investors and banks something completely different, that they're fabulously wealthy, so they could borrow more money and attract more investors. And in fact, that the Trump organization was talking out of two sides of their mouth, either lying to the tax authorities or lying to the investors. That's the subject of the New York investigation. It's the financial crimes of the Trump organization. Doesn't have anything to do with his conduct as president of the United States. And yet he's chosen to plead the Fifth Amendment right not to incriminate himself, which is a right that every American citizen has. Every American, every person who is subject to an investigation by the authorities in the United States has the right to say, I will not provide evidence because I might incriminate myself. But as Donald Trump himself correctly pointed out, it is something that usually criminals or suspected criminals do, not presidents and former presidents, at least we'd hope. So that's the New York investigation, where he has pled the Fifth Amendment right not to incriminate himself. Then we have the federal investigation of all of the conduct between the election and January 6, 2021, and that entire period where Donald Trump was trying to overthrow the election, overturn the election, overthrow the democratically elected government of the United States. And that is a much more serious set of crimes from the vantage point of a representative democracy. And the documents in Mar-a-Lago are a piece of that problem. Now, what he did was he took documents away from the White House that he shouldn't have. And that in and of itself is a crime. But the most important question is what was in those documents? What crime do they evidence? Do they show that he really, as his critics say, intended to overthrow the United States government in his effort to overturn the election results of 2020? And so that's what that investigation and that raid on his home in Mar-a-Lago is all about.
And you mentioned those classified documents, which is the main point of, the ongoing conversation, the ongoing situation that is happening between the former president and the FBI in Mar-a-Lago and all of the other different, people that kind of fit in between there. But I guess what, in your view, as the former White House chief ethics lawyer under George W. Bush, what, in your view, is the worst possible scenario in terms of, what could happen to President Trump?
Well, the worst possible scenario is that those documents provide further evidence, in addition to the evidence we already have, that Donald Trump wanted to use his power, the presidency, to keep himself in office despite Joe Biden having won the election, and that he was going to use the military to do that, as he contemplated in a meeting in the White House that we've already heard about that happened in early December of 2020. And if those documents back up that plan, it will provide further evidence of a plan to try and bring the military in on what would essentially be a military coup. That would be the most damaging possibly to him. So it's what is in the documents that's absolutely critical. Now, the fact he removed the documents and may have stolen government documents and destroyed government documents, that in and of itself is a crime. But we need to get down to the baseline issue, though, of why did he do that? Because there may be other much greater crimes that were involved.
And when you look at the situation personally, again, as the former White House chief ethics lawyer, I mean, how unprecedented is this in terms of a situation between, a former president of the United States?
We've never had a situation like this before. We had only one former president who probably committed serious enough crimes in office that he would have been criminally prosecuted. That was Richard Nixon. But he was pardoned by his successor, Gerald Ford. And the crime in Richard Nixon's case, well, certainly would have been obstruction of justice, the attempt to destroy evidence and to cover up the crime of the Watergate break-in of 1973. Richard Nixon did not seek to seize power, maintain power using the Justice Department or the power of the military. He did not try to stage a coup. This is a much more serious situation than we had with Nixon. So yes, indeed, this is unprecedented in American history.
Okay, that is former White House chief ethics lawyer, Richard Painter. Richard, thanks so much again for making the time tonight.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Wayne.